Oh, wait.
Okay, Mr. Clias, are you there?
My apologies, I am. Can you hear me?
We certainly can. Thank you, sir. Do you wish to testify today?
I wish to have a statement read that I sent to my counsel, and if I need to, I can go ahead and read it at the appropriate time.
Okay, we will swear you in so that if this public hearing will continue on should you need to testify, okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
You bet. There's a call-in user, that's 208-949 are the first numbers.
Commissioner, this is Matthew Johnson. I'm on via my iPad and phone, as I had microphone problems last time with the iPad.
Okay, very good. We've got you, and we'll swear you into Mr. Johnson in the event that you need to speak, okay?
Thank you.
You bet. Let's see, and I see Kelly George, and that is staff. And let me see. Okay, I don't have anybody else. So, Monica, if you would like to swear them.
Sure. Dan Lister, Tricia Nilsson, Darren Taylor, Sean Connor, Heath Clark, Stephen Kalias, Matthew Johnson. Do you swear or from the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? So help you God?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we got Dan Lister. I'm sorry, he is the planner with the DSD Department of Canyon County. Good morning, and it's good to see you. And Tricia Nielsen, who is the director of our DSD Department of Canyon County, is also with us. And Kelly George, as a matter of fact, is with our DSD Department in Canyon County as well. So good morning to all of you. And
good morning.
Dan, it looks like you're on.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Before you is staff provided you an addendum to a hearing that occurred on June 8th regarding this case. There was 3 questions or 3 additional information to be provided by the applicant that was requested by the commissioners. This was a copy of the Planning and Zoning Commission's FCOs, water table information, and then just more information about the potential development of that site. And so staff provided that addendum. Staff will just briefly go through that. So just to hit the points. So the P&Z FCOs were provided. This was based on Matthew Johnson's comments that that the commission found that the area is still agricultural and provided that reasoning for denial. As you can see in the FCOs, it does address that there was still agricultural uses on the property. However, the commission did find that the area was still something that they did acknowledge that this is designated as residential, and their other findings found that residential is the appropriate, is more appropriate in that area. They were just more concerned about the conceptual design based on concerns by the neighbors. Water table information was requested based on the neighbors, Mr. Robert Koffel, who testified that they had well issues. When talking to Patrick Kelly, water rights supervisor at the Water Resources, Idaho Water Resources, they did not find any water quality or quantity issues in that vicinity. They pulled up 2 well reports that were recently done and found depths of 150 feet at one in 2015 and another one in 2019 at a water table of 88 with a depth of 183 feet. So they didn't see any water table issues in that area. They looked at the Mr. Koffel's property and didn't really find any well permit because they felt that it was an older well, probably over 20 years old, and probably the reason why they're having issues with their well, finding sand and stuff in it. So with discussions with Patrick Kelly at Water Resources, they didn't find any issues regarding water. As for potential future development, a letter was provided by Darren Taylor, who is representing the the applicant. The letter kind of goes and provides more conceptual plans, which I think I've added to the slide. This is the previous slide. What's shown here is the property. To the left, you see the conceptual plan that was provided in this conditional use permit that was approved in 2003 for this property, which allowed about 13 lots at that time. This was the initial conceptual plan that was provided to the board, just kind of demonstrating what they think this may look like. This is very conceptual. The letter by Mr. Taylor provides this other scenario, and it just shows a different type of road system, just that would follow the topography on that property. The topography slopes significantly to the south in certain locations, so it would better suit that topography. What is interesting that Mr. Taylor states is the elevation difference between the properties to the south to just Locust Lane, and then how the property slopes further. And the concerns by the neighbors were they didn't want their visual views of that area to be impacted, and they didn't want houses up against it to where it might block their views. Mr. Taylor states basically that due to the spacing of that road, and then also requirements by the highway district, which require definitely public right-of-way dedication, and then also setbacks on those properties, that just the natural topography would drop down 20 to 30 feet just from their property, to where that they're not going to be blocked by any type of construction. They'll probably be seeing rooftops and backyards, if anything. That's how Mr. Taylor addressed some of those concerns. We did receive a letter from Matthew Johnson right after the hearing, just kind of believes that the information and conceptual plan were not part of the initial application, and therefore this really needs to be denied and go back through the process as a conditional rezone and be remanded back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. 2 late exhibits were provided to the commission. One was from Heath Clark of Clark and Wardle, and just kind of reiterating how this request is really commensurate with the area, and he addresses some of the concerns by Mr. Johnson. The one that I thought was interesting that wasn't brought up before is that the third one, they bring up recent approvals that were done by the board for cases. One of them they brought up is the Goff case that was heard. That was near the city of Caldwell, where they had a very conceptual plan of just 3 lots, but at the end it was a full rezone. They could have up to 8 or 9 lots. Then they brought up the Mortensen case that's in Middleton, which is an R1 zone and would be able to have up to 41 residential lots, and there was no conceptual plans for that. These cases are totally different locations. The one I was actually looking at after this is, if I pull up my map here, this is something that was shown to the board last hearing. One of the ones that was recently decided is, if you see on the zoning map to the left, it's RZ 2009-003. This is a rezone that recently occurred, and they proposed 11 lots in our zone, and that the findings there did find that this was commensurate with that area because of the existing development around it, the poor soils. This is no longer something that was viable for agricultural use. It's a very similar situation. The only thing different is the Pelican Lane one you see there is definitely otter shaped than the Brumball property. But that is more in line with that area, that decision, and not something that's from Caldwell or Middleton, that it's a whole different location. Then another letter was received from Matthew Johnson, and I think it just reiterates his initial concerns that this is speculative. and there should be more protective measures, and that those need to be vetted out, and that the application process, again, is problematic and should be denied because of it. Again, staff's recommendation at the end, you can see in the addendum that this area, the staff is recommending approval of this without a development agreement. The reasoning behind it is the area is commensurate with the development that is to the north, south, and east, and it's commensurate with the development we have approved in the past and recently through rezones. As you can see on these maps, there's rezones in that area that at any time could take those, still come in with a development permit or plat and develop those lots into rural residential zones, or as develop as much as is allowed for rural residential. So staff didn't see issues with that. And again, though agricultural use has been shown on this property, and I don't think the applicant has denied it, our maps are showing that these are soil characteristics that are have more severe issues when it comes to the type of crops that you can do on there, and it's also shown as non-prime farmland. And the map here shows just that property, but it actually extends pretty far out to the east and to the north, or I'm sorry, the south. And so it's an area that has been determined to not be suitable or found suitable for providing food and viable farmland for this area. And it's probably the reason why we have a future designation of residential in this area, because of the surrounding existing development, and also it's something that it's not it may not be viable for agricultural use. With that being said, staff still is recommending that this application be approved. A lot of the concerns brought up by Mr. Johnson and adjacent neighbors could be addressed at the platting stage, where they would have a forum via 2 public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Commission again and the board. So a lot of the concerns they had about traffic, about things like that, could be addressed at the stage where there is a preliminary plat showing the development and the design. Again, none of the agencies found the rezone to be impactful to their requirements, or they did not oppose this rezone. They all found that future development would be able to they would be able to review it at the time of future development, which is platting, and to address any issues via their regulations prior to approval of that plat. One thing I just wanted to, I think, is to give you a little history and the worst case scenario of this property. So right now it's zone ag. It's an original lot, so it can be divided. It can have a house on it. It can be split and have 2 houses. If the rural residential zone goes through, the least worst case would be they can do a land division and have 4 properties, and they can all have houses. The worst case scenario is they divide it to their full amount. I think it's 30.35 acres, which we say 15, but with improvements with the hillside on there and how they're going to have to maneuver that, staff still believes that they're only really going to get 13 lots out of that. At the end, staff believes that this is really a 13-lot subdivision. When you look at the surrounding development around it, it would be commensurate with those type of lot sizes and existing dwellings within that area. With that, staff concludes the presentation, and if you have any questions, I'll be able to answer those.
Madam Chair, thank you. Dan, I have a question for you. It's a process question, so we always want to make sure that there's integrity in the process. The application, or the letter received by White Peterson from Matthew Johnson on the procedure on the application,
and there's some notes in the minutes that were provided dated June 8th. Can you clarify for me, because I'm not quite sure yet, we had a conceptual site plan that was not provided for the benefit of planning and zoning. Is that there? Do I understand that there's an omission oversight in providing that? Help me understand that better.
No, to the chair. So the application itself is a full rezone. They don't have to do a conceptual plan. It's just they found this is consistent with this area. They're requesting a development agreement. I think the board felt that, or not the board, but the Planning and Zoning Commission found that it might be better to have a conceptual plan to look at, or a development agreement in this case, because of some of the issues. The applicant provided a conceptual plan to the board because it's just to address any issue that to show that this is not going to be, detrimental to this area. But they're still requesting the full rezone. It doesn't, so they don't want to base it off that conceptual plan. They just wanted to provide that as additional information for your review to show that this is still commensurate with what is being asked. The findings still can be made without it. Again, I believe if the board today decided that they wanted to base it off a development agreement, it would have to go through renoticing. But it wouldn't have to be remanded back down to the P&Z for that review, unless the board decided that they wanted that to happen. But it doesn't have to. It would just be another hearing to add the development agreement and conceptual plan.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And the proposal is not and has never been for potentially 30 lots. Number one, because part of it is the topography, and number two, that's not how it was submitted. Is that correct? It looks like it was submitted as originally on the concept plan, a 14-lot plan?
Correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was their initial conception. Yep.
Okay. And then can you talk about it's a part of the staff report dated July 24th, and the Lake Lowell site layout map, so Lake Shore is on the north end, Top Road is on the west end. So there's 3 lots across the front that total almost 7 acres and that are not numbered as lots. Can you talk about what that is, please?
So I believe you're talking about the ones I'm showing right here on this slide. It says not included. So when you look at the history of those lots, that lot, those 3 lots shown right there it's an original lot. It's government lot number 7, and this larger one's government lot number 8. So they're both 2 original lots. So at the end, what happened is this was one time going to be part of that CUP process to split all this up as one. But when I think the recession hit and they decided not to go with that at that point, what they just did is took that original lot and sold it off, and it got divided through a land division. So that is a whole different ownership. That got divided already. And so that has used, so it's not part of that application anymore. It's not the same ownership anymore. And that's why it's not part of that. But back in the CUP in 2003, that was part of it. That was part of that thing. But yeah.
So that's been sold off. Is that what I hear you saying in that process? Okay.
Correct.
And then, thank you, Dan. And then I had a question. I had business out in this area last night. So there is a bench that runs east to west on here. Basically, it kind of curves around with the Lake Lowell. But this new conceptual site plan, you're saying that the appropriateness of this, given the topography and that change in elevation, staff has taken that into consideration and believes that Southwest District Health would be able to find ways to locate and mitigate for the individual well and septic requests. Is that correct?
Through the chair, correct. They again during the preliminary platting stage, before they even submit, they have to do a pre-application meeting with Southwest District Health to make sure the lots that they are proposing are adequate and can serve. So sometimes that means that they have to drop a lot or something to make that work. So they do have to review that. And so when it does come through at the time of the hearing process for the preliminary plat, that should have already been vetted out.
Okay, one more question, Madam Chair. There was a subdivision out there which is in proximity, I think it's maybe a mile east of this and it was developed by Ed Hendershot a number of years ago. Do you know that property and what the average lot size is for that development on Lake Shore?
I apologize, I do not. Is it on this map? I'm trying to, I just looked at the ones at about a 1 mile radius. I apologize.
That's okay. I think it's in close proximity, but it's a question that is kind of out of the blue. I was just curious what the size of those lots were. Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize.
So, Dan,
yes.
the Lake Lowell site layout, okay, you have those two next to each other, the two conceptual plans next to each other, the black and white ones. There, okay. The one on the right, okay, that was the original one?
No, that was the one provided the first time you heard this. So this was provided as part of this conceptual plan. It's basically the same thing if you look at it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to understand, though, because what you have said is staff have said only 13 lots. And so the way will you go over that again?
Yeah. So let me go back. So here's the conceptual plan for that. What they did for on the left here, you'll see what was approved for the conditional use permit.
Okay.
And the lots here, shown here, not this part here, is 13 lots.
Okay,
and this is based off, you can see the slopes, they identified the slopes going through it, the type of road, and then the lots configuration. This is probably because of the addition of this road going through and then dedication along here and here, that they got 13.
Okay.
The applicant's saying they could probably get 14, but they would have to demonstrate that. And that's what they would demonstrate is the plating stage after they talk to the Highway District and Southwest District Health and the Fire District and things, and what they really can actually achieve.
Okay. Now, the point was made more than one time, and I want you to go through this again. It was more than one time made that this needed to be put back to planning and zoning. That was a suggestion more than once in here that planning and zoning should have seen this and heard all this information. And would you go to the reasoning behind that?
Well, what they're requesting is, the answer is they're asking for a full rezone. So they're not trying to base the rezone based on a conceptual plan. They believe that the development can be properly addressed during the platting stage, where there would be development shown and there'll be a hearing process for the neighbor who is concerned to address their concerns with that. In this stage, all they're trying to show or demonstrate that this is consistent with our findings to approve a rezone. And it doesn't need a conceptual plan. The only reason why they provided a conceptual plan after the P&Z hearing was to kind of demonstrate this is not really changing much from what the CUP shows. So the CUP was approved for that. They're basically trying to follow what was approved for that, but they didn't submit a conceptual plan to add it, change it to a conditional rezone with a development agreement. They did this to show that this is not really changing from a previous approval. That's my understanding of it. And so if it were,
it's just information.
Basically, it's just correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dan. Okay, anything else for Dan?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, we will go. Melanie, are you speaking or Darren Taylor first on behalf of the applicant? Okay.
I would like to speak for everything Darren Taylor.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Name and address, please.
Thank you. Darren Taylor, 1434 New York Street, Middleton, Idaho, 83644. Thank you, Commissioners. Since we have this map up and we've been talking about some of the density items and the layout items, I'd like to talk about that first.
Okay.
On the left, I'm going to come back to the map. You see the
If
survey.
you need, let's see, try one of these, and then you can stay at the microphone.
Thank you. The green dot, the pointer, is looking at the request
Where's
image
it at?
that Dan had.
Not showing. Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a little bit hard to see. It's the slide labeled request, and it shows on the right the 30.35 acres with Pump Road, Locust Lane, Lakeshore Drive, and the subdivision to the east. You'll notice it's South Shore Subdivision and South Shore Subdivision number 2. According to Dan's staff report, pages 4 and 5, this is the Ed Hendershot subdivision.
Okay.
And this is his property that he did subdivide. So in 1986, Lake Shore number 1, or the original, which is on the north closest to the lake, was subdivided with an average lot size of 2.46 acres. And then phase 2 was subdivided in 2009 with an average of 1.22 acres per lot.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
1.22. You're welcome. So phase 1 had 12 lots at 2.46 acres. Phase 2 had 15 lots with 1.22 acres. Now, if you look to the left, you'll see the survey that was done a long time ago. I believe Dan, the planner, talked about it being with a conditional use permit reference just at the bottom of that map, C 2003-91. So back in 2003, somebody surveyed that property, and I think it was Ed Hendershot, and we'll talk about Wells in just a minute, but that's why. I believe Ed owns one of these parcels on the north side, one of the 3. The point I want to make on this record survey, 2 points. First, you'll see the dark hatched area that transverses from the northwest to the southeast. That is the hill. And you'll notice that the lines are really close together. That's pretty slopey. Dan, will you go to the soils map, please? Thank you. That one. So number 6 on the top left image is that hillside. And if you look down at the key or legend, it says not prime farmland. But if you look at the number on the map, it's a number 6. That means it's the worst soils possible in the soil classification service, classification system. Thank you. Back to the request image, Dan. The second thing I'd like to point out is somebody thought they wanted to take a road from Pump Road, which is right, one access, none off of Locust Lane, but they wanted to cut through the middle of that hill and just bring that road straight across, so from west to east. That ruins hillside, it disturbs hillside, and you've got to have 3-to-1 slopes on your reclamation of it. So you waste a lot of land with that layout. Now, Dan, will you go back to the first concept plan that was provided to the Planning and Zoning Commission? Thank you. This is an image of that. It leaves off the blues, which Dan's already addressed, are not part of this. There are 3 existing homes, one on each of those 3 lots, one of which is Ed Hendershot. Dan, go back to the image that shows the concept plan that I submitted with my letter. So once again, on the right of this is that concept that was done formerly and is really not a good concept for this property. I started doing one on the left. The surveyor dropped everything, and because this board requested it, I wanted to submit it with my letter. So that's about 2 hours of work, and it would have gotten further, but I said, time's up. We've got to get this letter submitted. So you'll notice that we don't know if there will be a road that runs at the top of the hill with houses on each side. That's this road. Or if there'll be a road at the toe of the hill, because we just don't have the topography yet. Even though it's been done before, it wasn't done by this engineer or surveyor, and all engineering and surveying is proprietary. So you don't get that. You have to redo it. And we're in the process of redoing it. So what is governing is Canyon County Code, our zone standards, which would be a 2-acre average minimum lot size for this property. So if there were no roads and no right-of-way dedication along Pump Road and Locust Lane, it would be 15 lots. It goes down from there to what? We don't know, because we haven't taken off the dedication along the public roads, let alone the road or roads inside that fit the topography.
Senator, I have a question for you, before you go farther, and I appreciate what you're saying. Again, I was out there, so the question is either for you or for Van Lister, and you may not know that. There is a pivot sitting on that piece that is in the southwest corner and it's in wheat. And so when is the last time, it would be difficult with that slope to get equipment on there. I don't think you could do it, but when's the last time this ground was farmed?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Van Beek, I don't know. When I first saw that hill, I was actually a little surprised at how steep it was and they were even farming it. When I was out there, somebody was out cutting down the weeds. And I'm like, yes, finally, somebody cutting down weeds. So I thought it's definitely not prime farm ground, and it would be difficult to farm. I don't know when last farm.
Thank you for the history on this property, for the location, identification of what this property.
Thank you. You bet. So attached to my letter is this image. It's a picture from the Idaho Department of Water Resources well log online. And I was shocked to see that none of the subdivisions, none of the wells for the subdivisions to the east are included on here. And they were built, remember, it was 1986 and 2009. And we don't have well logs for those online at IDWR. So you'll see the blue dots. Those are wells that are logged. Sorry, I'm holding up a black and white image. I don't have a color printer on. One of the parcels is actually the one due north of the subject property. There's only one dot out there, and it's on, I think, Ed Hendrickshot's property. The reason it's red is because Ed, in 1993, drilled a well that was 16 feet deep and he had static water. So he had a 1993 well. I apologize, this is 1982. I was looking at the wrong spot. This is a 1982 well on Ed Hendrickshot's place, 16 feet deep, that was abandoned. And in 1992, no, that's the neighbors. In 2005, it was deepened to, this is Hendrickshot Construction, it was deepened to 199 feet. So the one well in the area that was not good was Ed Hendrickshot's 16-foot deep well that was subsequently re-drilled down to 199 feet. So the neighbor that has sand in his well or coming in, this is a sandy area, and I don't know that the neighbor's causing sand problems, and there's not a well log for his property, according to Dan and Kelly at IDWR. So it's really hard to say what the cause is.
Madam Chair, I have a question for our staff, and Dan, can you help us out with the time frames? I know that with the evolution and process of time that things get better, but in the absence of well logs for the Hendrickshot property, how does that get approved in there? That would have had to go through Canyon County Planning and Zoning. Is there a timeline that you can provide for Southwest District's involvement in that, or give me more information on what that looks like and the implications of not having well logs for that property?
Sorry, are you asking me? I'm sorry.
Yes. No, that's okay. I was asking you. Do you need me to repeat the question?
Yeah, I believe you asked, no, yeah, you have to repeat it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm referencing an exhibit provided by Mr. Taylor in favor of the applicant, which shows the layout and it accompanies the well log data. So it's got a number of test wells that are located out there along Lake Shore and Locust Lane in that vicinity. It has the abandoned well on Ed Hendershot's property, and it has a clear lack of absence of any test wells and log data showing things that would indicate appropriate depth for well. And talk to me about the timeline of Southwest District Health. Why are we not having this when this is clearly rural Canyon County, and when does Southwest District start getting actively involved in providing feedback on wells and locations of wells for property?
Well, as they, through the chair, as they go through the platting process, when they're actually developing it, that's when they would involve Southwest District Health and Water Resources and DEQ, just to ensure that they're going to meet the applicable regulations, state law and their applicable regulations. So it would be something at the time of design, they would want to reach out to them and get their feedback on it, because they do not want to submit a plat that doesn't have that information, where they would have to go back to the drawing board if it gets to hearing and we don't have that information. So it would be something that they would have to investigate and provide that prior to submittal of the preliminary plat.
And let's make sure that we're both on the same page. I'm talking about the Hendershot property and the lack of well log data for that property, which was originally 1986 and then 2009.
You're right. Yeah, and I guess I don't know how to address that. When talking to Water Resources, yeah, they didn't bring up the only wells they could find were that were newer was this one here and this one here.
That's okay. So there's nothing,
sorry,
I have a well log report for the 16-foot static well that was abandoned.
That's the red, Madam Chair, Commissioner Hibbing, it's the red dot to the right. Okay.
Thank you for that. And then, that's my question. Why don't we have record? Because one of the concerns that's brought up by the people in opposition to this is the impact of the wells and the groundwater and proximity to the lake, and those are valid questions. So that, I'm wondering how we pass a subdivision without requiring that, and that's part of due diligence. So, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but it's a question that there's an answer because it's part of our due diligence.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Van Beek, the well logs are all through the state of Idaho, every well drilled. So this will be a record that will be on record with IDWR and not here at the county.
So maybe I misunderstood what you said. I thought you said that IDWR, that's what I had written down, did not have, I put down no well logs on record at IDWR for Hendershot subdivision.
Correct, and you see that on the image before you, no blue dots on those 15 plus 12, 27 lots that were previously approved. And the county would actually never have those except for maybe in its building permit files upstairs when building permits were pulled for each of those homes.
You're saying the due diligence doesn't lie here.
Correct.
It would lie with the state, but the state also doesn't have that.
Which is, who knows why the state doesn't have those records. But I can tell you that it was required and it is probably on file at DSD if DSD has building permit records back to 86 and 94. But
thank you for that clarification. Sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to figure out. Well, the property is clearly adjacent to that. That would mean we don't have any record of well depth or surface to groundwater information on that Hendershot property. Is that correct?
You're asking Dan or me?
You.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Denby. what I'm saying is there probably is, and it's probably upstairs in the building permit.
Okay, thank
But
you.
we don't have it here today with this for this year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Just two more quick comments. There's been talk about the plan not having been in front of the P&Z Commission. I like submitting a concept plan when I submit rezone applications. However, it's really a decision by the applicant. Sometimes an applicant does not want to pay a surveyor $5,000 or $10,000 to go get topography and boundary for a concept plan until they know that they've got a development that's going to happen. So hence a rezone application. The other way to do it is, of course, with the plan. Neither one's right or wrong, just different preferences of the landlord. Last comment is development agreement. I don't know what this county might be looking for in a development agreement as far as content, but because of this is a relatively straightforward piece of property, it's bordered on two sides by public roads requiring dedication. They'll have one approach off of a known road, and because it's rural and your setbacks are large, the lot sizes are 1 to 2 acres. I guess just the RR code is probably pretty clear on what it requires and doesn't require, along with the other agency standards. So when I talked to Mr. Johnson yesterday, neither of us were aware at that moment of anything that gave rise to maybe either of us wanting to develop. So we'll defer to the board.
And staff does not. So, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie, are you going to, or you're good?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Sean Connor. Please, name and address, please.
Yes. Sean Connor, my address is 11476 North Woodgate, Lowell, Idaho. 8605. Excuse me.
Okay.
So I guess what I'd like to go over, just really quick, are just a few, personal kind of things, the way that I'm looking at this project. I know it was brought up, more than once that we were speculative investors on this project. I'd like you guys to know that this is going to be a subdivision where my wife and my kids are going to live out. We actually want to live in a subdivision. We're going to build a house there, and we want to stay there for a long period of time. So I care about this neighborhood a lot. And I'm from Idaho. I'm from a farming community originally, and I understand that there's sometimes opposition to development. I also understand that, that the amount of planning and effort that we're going to put into the preliminary plat, I think you guys will see that we have taken this really seriously, and we're trying to provide the best product that's available and still keep the agricultural feel to the area without, impacting that as little as possible. I also feel like I would say this fits in with the zoning and usage. We plan on addressing any concerns, I guess, during plat stages. We're going for quality product here and not quantity, so we're not pushing for higher density. We'd like to get 14 lots, but if we get 13, that's okay too. We just want to make sure that the end product is a quality product, and that we do a great job and design this beautifully to fit in that area. We just did the site plan based on a request after the first hearing. We basically were just using that as a general design for concept. We didn't want to stick to that layout necessarily. It was just to give an idea of what was available on property. Larry Richardson is going to be our builder on most of these lots. I think he's quite familiar with him. He builds an excellent quality product that's wins a lot of awards every year at the Parade Homes. He never built the same house twice. Every one of his houses is custom. He's been building here in Idaho since the 80s. And my home is going to be built by Larry Richardson as well. And if anybody knows Larry, he doesn't allow people to build anything around him that's going to bring the value down to his property that he's building on. So I think people will be pretty happy. I think the area will appreciate the developments going in. by us. And also, if you look to the east, to the west 4 miles, we have Crest Estates, which is a subdivision that was done by Larry.
What's the name of that?
Sorry, Crest Estates.
Okay.
So it's a 10, and actually, if I could, I brought some photos out for you guys to kind of show you the product.
So what would this exhibit be, Dan?
We'll call it Exhibit 7.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
So as we look at those pictures, you'll see that, that we're not here to just put out any house we can. We're not production builders. We're not developing this land to just make money. We want to make this a very quality, beautiful product. And the stuff development, when we get to planning stages, you'll see that when we get to the preliminary plat hearing. Again, we are only looking to change the color on the map for a rezone. We're not looking to make any other decisions at this point. We feel like it fits into the rural residential zoning, future zoning, and we're just looking at a rezone here. That's all I have. So
you will live in here. Your personal home is going to be here.
Yes.
So are you going to be the architectural review, or you and the builder, is Mr. Richardson going to build it? Per your understanding or per what your desires are, if you're the owner of this, is that Mr. Richardson will build all the houses in here?
That's currently the plan, yes.
So then there will be a design review of all of them, so that, not that you're going to tell people what they can have, but you're going to have certain standards.
Yes, there will be certain standards and minimum square footage. We're also looking at the views and trying to figure out how to make that work the best we can to not cause any problems for anybody else, and also get the best, most efficient site plan we can for that.
Okay, and views is one of the things, if people are worried about their views and everything. And my dad always said, if you want a view, you better own it. But how, as you look at that up there, and you have that pointer, you just turn it on the bottom, where is that, someplace, okay, locust, those ones at the bottom are the same, they're the same height as locust, or where, someone said something in there, take that hill down because it's obstructing views. What hill are they referring to? Because that is a sloped property, and certainly you can't, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Okay. Can you answer it? Okay. I'll follow up. Okay. So to answer your question, I'm not exactly sure what they wanted us to do. I know that this is the only house that's behind us that would have any impact that I can see on the field.
Okay.
And this house, as Ken was saying, is about the land up here at the bottom of this. It continues to elevate as we go to the south. But at the bottom of his property across the street from ours, this is about 30 to 40 feet higher than we are from here. So,
okay.
So that even this person, I'm not sure exactly why that would obstruct any view. Mr. Kalias' property is over here on the side. And so anything that we built here, we're planning on making sure that we don't obstruct any views. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just want to say a couple of things. Thank you for providing the information. That was one of the pieces of information that you graciously provided as a request back the last year. It is helpful to see. I know Larry Richardson and his wife Kat, and so they are good participants in Snake River Valley building. And one of the things that we like to see as we improve in rural Canyon County before is that we address concerns of just speculative building, because it's like a wild card, we don't know. So thank you for providing this. Is really what I wanted to say. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you. And
Any further questions for Mr. Connor?
Well, yes, I do. So really, it looks like with the conceptual design provided by Mr. Taylor, that he was brought for today's hearing, that there would be potentially 3 houses up on the bluff on that little view, but then that would slope down and that elevation would accommodate the rest of it.
Are you talking about this side over here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, if you go to the left-hand side of the map of the new schematic,
Yeah, got
that
it.
one. So those 3 properties would be,
You're asking me if they would be
they would
on the hill?
yes.
Yeah, I think it's the topography, I don't know if we can go back to that. The topography map available from 2003. Again.
Which one, where approximately would your house be?
So,
Whoops, go there.
the one that has the topo. Not sure. Anyways, so you're asking, my house would be up in that, sorry, in this area right here.
Oh, okay.
We want to be closer to the water. Just have a lot of kids.
Okay.
Trying to find a place for them to play and hang out. I think what you're asking me is, are there going to be these 3 lots on the left-hand side?
Yeah, that's it.
That's not.
That's the 3 lots on the left-hand side, going to be the ones that are on top of the hills that you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I would say probably not. It's going to be, the one on the left-hand side against Pump Road is a very low wing. Yeah, that's where the topography is very low, the elevation there. And so we'd have to build it. In order to even get a view of the lake there, we'd have to build a 2-story. But it's not going to obstruct anybody's view on that side. So I think we would have probably approximately 3 or 4 lots that would be up on the plot.
Thank you for that information, clarification.
Okay. Anything further for Ms. Cohen? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, let's see. We have Keith.
Members of the Commission, good to be back. Keith Clark, 251 East Front Street in Boise, and I'm working with Mr. Connor and Rubik's Land Holdings. And just wanted to address a couple of things that seem to have cropped up over the last couple of weeks, more from a legal perspective, because I think Darren's done a great job of giving you a little bit more color about the application itself. So, the first theme that I would want to hit is that this really is a pretty simple application. It is precisely in accord with the comprehensive plan. It designates this area as residential. But it is not a black box shrouded in mystery, which is kind of the way that it's been portrayed by some of the opponents. You actually know a lot about what can happen on this property just based on the simple site constraints. And we've talked about that a little bit, but based on the RR zoning that's proposed, you know that it has to be an average of 2-acre lots. You know the setbacks, you know the bulk standards. And this has been discussed a number of times here. You know that the outside number of lots that we can have would be 13 or 14. So you also know, which is kind of a little bit unusual at this stage in the game, exactly how the access is going to work, because the highway district is weighed in on that, and the applicant is fine with the constraints that they put on it. We're going to take an access off road. You also know that the preliminary and final plat hearings are still required, and that we're still going to come in with all of the engineering design that would satisfy a lot of the questions that have come up at that point, which is the typical point process for that. So really the question for you is whether this meets your rezone standards. And your rezone standards, I would say, are more at the 20,000 foot level versus the 5,000 foot level that the plat standards are at. And it's things like, is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? And again, of course it is. It's residential. We see it yellow on all of those maps that Dan has shown us. It's consistent with the area development. It's actually right in line with the density of the project immediately to the east, as we've discussed today. And I also just want to point out that there is, a maximum of 14 homes on this property is just not going to have a negative impact on the character of the area. It matches the character of the area. You already see that residential development there. And there is no evidence in the record of a negative impact on your public service providers. They've all had an opportunity to weigh in, and again, the highway district is giving you specific direction on this. So I think it does meet each of the rezone standards. And again, that's the first step. Second step is to come back to those plat applications. So I think I'd like to address just a couple of the comments that Mr. Johnson has made and maybe add to a few of the things that have been discussed here. First, there's been a lot of discussion that this doesn't constitute orderly development if there isn't a detailed site plan and all these questions answered at this point. That's not what we mean by orderly development. What we mean is it in accord with planning? And it certainly is in accord with planning, and the agencies agree with that. I also want to talk about this concept of speculation. That word keeps being raised, and we use it, it's a term of art. People like to use it because it has a negative connotation associated with it. But here's the thing that, we don't discriminate based on who the applicant is, and we don't discriminate based on who might own it in the future. The only question is whether the standards have been met. Excuse me. And then I'll wrap up with the procedural question that's been raised a number of times about whether this needs to go back to P&Z. First, I would say that that's a question of interpretation of your own code. So you, as the county commissioners, get to interpret your code and make that decision. And if it was challenged for some reason, there would be deference to your interpretation so long as it's reasonable. But I would point out that the only new information that's been provided has been provided at the request of either P&Z or the county commissioners. And it would be atypical to punish an applicant when they are being responsive to P&Z and county commissioner requests. But most importantly, I think you just have to ask, what would P&Z be reviewing if it's remanded? Again, P&Z reviewed a rezone request to RR. They didn't review a specific site plan. They didn't review a plat application. So if we were to remand this, they would be reviewing the exact same thing that's before you now. It's still just a rezone request to RR. So there's no reason to remand this back. Now, P&Z got wrapped around the axle a little bit on whether a site plan is not required, but that's not really the point. If you remand, they would be reviewing an RR rezone application, which is exactly what's before you. So from my perspective, I think it is time to move on with this. You have a great deal of information. I think you've gotten a lot from Mr. Connor, and you've gotten a lot from our planner on this application, and I hope all the questions you can answer. Again, this applicant will have to jump through those additional hoops when they submit the preliminary plat application with the public hearing. So happy to answer any other questions that might raise.
I'm good.
Madam Chair, and I really appreciate your comments, Mr. Clark, and you are correct in that, or at least for myself, I'll speak for myself, I feel a high sense of moral responsibility, I'm going to say it that way, to address the concerns, and I think the chair feels the same way, but so that we completely vet out concerns and help mitigate questions that might persuade people to see the value in a project. And so, number one, you've already touched on this, but I'm going to do it again because it's contained in the staff report. When we're answering the 7 criteria for a rezone application, B on that, when considering the surrounding land uses, is the proposed zone change more appropriate than the current zoning designation? So the conclusion that was reached in the staff report is that the proposed zone change was not more appropriate. So what we've heard today is testimony that I feel like by continuing this hearing has allowed us to see a different perspective based on the information brought forth by Mr. Taylor and some of the concern and diligence presented by Mr. Connor. So that part of your, I guess, contribution to the testimony today helped shape a decision that may have more fully vetted out that question. And then, will the proposed zoning map amendment negatively affect the character of the area? So some of the questions that I had, which Mr. Taylor has answered, in the proximity of existing development, the age of that development, some of the, like in every application, there's positives and negatives. So when we continue to vet out that information, that helps me do my job as a commissioner. And then I also think, even though the applicant didn't have to provide, there was an attorney involved for the other side. And so the responsiveness, I do appreciate that, and that's good when we can get all of that on the table and get a different take again on a second site plan. I know that wasn't required given the topography, and also that this is ag ground. You know, those questions have to be answered.
Speaking of the attorney on the other side,
Yes.
they are still waiting to testify, so if we could,
Madam Chair, I thank you for that reminder, and I did not mean to interrupt that process. I wanted to respond to the information that Mr. Clark brought forth, and I'm ready to hear Mr. Johnson's testimony.
thank you, Mr. Clark. Matt Johnson, are you still there?
Still here. Can you hear me okay, commissioners?
We can hear you fine. Let me set the microphone so everybody in this room can hear you. Okay. There you go.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners. I'll try to keep this brief. I do apologize that the most recent comment letter on behalf of my client was so late. Unfortunately, that was necessitated by the timing of some of the other information that was provided by the applicant. I would like to know one thing, which is, I believe my client has become more comfortable with the idea of this, with the involvement of Mr. Connor and Mr. Taylor and Mr. Clark. I think these are showing steps in the right direction of taking this whole development idea seriously. Frankly, if those people had been in place and some of the ideas presented early on in the process, a lot of this may have been unnecessary. Unfortunately, all of this has really come in, at the 11th hour. As far as, Mr. Taylor's involvement, his letters dated July 15th. That's the first, and was submitted in the staff report addendum. That's the first my client became aware of his involvement. Our awareness of the involvement of Mr. Clark wasn't until basically yesterday or the day before. And that gets to kind of the core procedural concern here. And before I get fully into that, I just want to point one additional thing out. It's been stated multiple times, this is a simple rezone application. That's true, but it's a rezone application in a zone, in an area that's in transition between agricultural and residential. And it raises an important question, at least a question I understand to be important to the county, of how agricultural land is protected. Indeed, a lot of reliance has been placed on the soils report, and it keeps pointing to that. But the facts on the ground, and this is well on record in this case, are this is a viable piece of agricultural land. The only reason it's out of production right now is because the heirs who inherited the property ended the farm lease on it. As was stated at the last hearing, there was no indication the farmer who's been farming it for years would not have continued that lease. In addition, and I can confirm this now after having spoken with my client who farms the neighboring property, he would be interested in acquiring or leasing the land for farm uses. So the idea that it's not viable is a misstatement, I think, by staff when they've said that. It may not be the perfect piece of ag ground, but it is very much viable. And that was a big part of the discussion at the P&Z level that kind of keeps getting overlooked. And that was a big reason that planning and zoning recommended denial of this without much further information, showing that any kind of residential development, the benefits of such outweigh the loss of viable ag ground. And that's the criteria we come back to on the rezone, and it keeps kind of getting glossed over or skipped over. There are a lot of the other standards for rezoning this would meet. Nobody's denying or disputing that the comprehensive plan understands residential development will happen here. My client understands someday this property and even his property are likely in the path of residential development. The key question for the commission is how you manage that appropriately, how you provide for that to be orderly. And so that's the issue you're facing. You're turning, ag land into residential. And frankly, if the development proposal had been more complete early on, that could have been addressed at the neighborhood meeting. None of the neighbors at the neighborhood meeting saw any of this concept plan. All they received was a statement from the original applicant that this was for speculation purposes. So no neighbors had any reasonable opportunity to say, hey, here's concerns we have that might be something worthy of considering in a condition for a conditional rezone or as a condition in a development agreement. Likewise, at the planning and zoning level, planning and zoning only heard an application that said, hey, this is for speculation, no concept plan in place. That is why planning and zoning recommended denial. They had no reasonable opportunity to recommend up to the commission, hey, here's some issues that this development raises that should be addressed by, and perhaps instead doing this as a conditional rezone or by having the development agreement as part of it. Now, I'm not going to dispute, what Mr. Taylor said. He understands it correctly that, the applicant has some leeway as to whether they apply for this as simply a rezone or do a combined application with the plat. But to portray the idea that somehow the platting process provides the same opportunity for neighbors to provide comment and address concerns is simply not right. The conditional rezone is at the rezone stage. Development agreements are at the rezone stage. That's the opportunity for neighbors, affected parties, agencies to raise concerns and have assurances about them via some type of condition. That's why this property was under a conditional use permit under the previous attempt to develop the property. And so at the end of the day, a little more time, frankly, working with the new applicant and a more professional development team, many of my clients' concerns maybe could have been addressed. But that simply, there hasn't been time for that. At the current time, my client's position remains that this application should be denied as it's presented now. I fully anticipate the, frankly, more professional development group now handling it could bring it back with a much better conceptual plan to assuage concerns, address concerns, allow people an actual reasonable opportunity to comment on it, and it can be addressed appropriately instead of this sort of sandbagging at the 11th hour of a whole bunch of new information that no other level in the required process, not the neighborhood meeting, not the staff in its original analysis, not the planning and zoning in preparing its recommendation, got to see or address in any way. The result of P&Z may be very different with a better presentation of the conceptual plan and addressing the concerns. That would allow P&Z to use its expertise in this to say, okay, is a straight up rezone appropriate, or do we need to talk about a recommended conditional rezone or a development agreement? And that's the reason ultimately that my client's position remains. We recommend denying this, or in the alternative that the commission remand this back for better development so it's coming back up and everybody's had those appropriate opportunities to input. The debate about whether the commission could do it on its own now, Mr. Clark and I can have a legal discussion about that, and I'm not necessarily going to dispute him that legally maybe the commission could do that, but whether that's good practice under the county's own code and the way it wants these to be handled, that's the bigger question, and that's the reason, again, we recommend reversal or remand of this application.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Johnson?
No, at this time.
Not at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Mr. Colias, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
All right. Good morning to the commissioners.
Good morning.
I would like to make a short comment, if acceptable.
Yes.
We're respectfully requesting the denial of this application, and it was because it was originally a very speculative application. And if approved, approval should be at least subject to the sale concluding and development commencing within 2 years. If this is not achievable, it would be clear evidence that this application is purely speculative in its intentions and its representations. I respectfully disagree with Councilman Dale. Who and how this development is to occur is of the utmost importance in maintaining the agricultural basis of Canyon County and the quality of the residential developments. Although I still have a residence in Boise, I live out of state and would like to communicate that this is precious land for agriculture. And if utilized for residential, it would only allow for 10 to 14 single family units. The estimated price range that they reported is around $800,000. So you'd equate that to removal of farmland for out-of-state or out-of-county residents. Your median gross income for household in Canyon County is approximately $43,000 a year, which means very few people in Canyon County are going to even be allowed any affordable housing. I'd like to add that it's common knowledge. I've been a developer for many years, actually. And it's common knowledge in most municipalities that to maintain 2-acre lots is a significant waste of land. It ends up being bad land management, and it's not to even mention how risky it is to develop these lots this close to the wildlife preserve in Lake Lowell with individual septic tanks and wells. And we're doing this without even having a water study. You've even showed in this study how little information there is. It's almost dangerous to be permitting septic tanks and individual wells without having more knowledge of the water. In my opinion, if this land is developed for residential, it should be properly land planned with city services available and significantly more units. So the average, or at least the average incomes of Canyon County residents can at least have an opportunity for the purchase of homes offered for sale. This application in its present form, I think, is a waste of a very valuable resource. The validity of my statement is supported in that the same zoning for our family parcel would probably triple its value. But as the descendant of 2 generations, we've been there, I think, since 1943. I'm trying to be prudent with the land in its current agricultural use. The only other thing I'd like to add, as an outsider looking at the subject property maps that Mr. Lester provided, this is kind of an important deal. If this goes, you're basically committing to, in my opinion, you're really on the move. This isn't just 30 acres. You're going to see my piece end up being residential, the piece next to it being residential. And I think it would be very important for you to take a more serious look at this than just approving the zoning. I want to add another small comment. The applicant now has some professional representation. And when I heard one of them mention that the applicant would not want to spend $10,000 on a topography study, I don't know if that applicant is worthy of the full review. If you just take the old topography map and you lay it on top of the original plan that they submitted, it doesn't make any sense. There's no way that site plan could even work. That's why the old site plan that was provided for your review that never was developed was so hodgepodge. And I understand that there's a case to rezone this, but in most municipalities, this would be a land use to the general plan if it was in a city. You folks have, unfortunately, a lot of responsibility because you've got to make serious judgment calls without having a lot of information in front of you. If you rezone this, you've committed this property to whatever it ends up. And I think in this case, you've also committed to a balance of the land of agricultural being removed in return for residential.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Thank you.
Okay. There is no one signed up. Darren, did you have a question for who?
Mr. Clias.
Are you still there, Mr. Clias?
Yes, I am.
I understood you to say from your testimony that you were interested in this property. Have you made an offer to Mr. Connor on this property?
Well, Mr. Connor isn't that's what's important to know, is that Mr. Connor isn't the owner of the property.
Have you made an offer to the owner of the property?
No, I have not. The property is for sale at this point. I believe it's still for sale. I think the question is this formally even under contract right now? Or is it still just a letter of intent to attempt to get this zoned?
And I understand what you're saying, and I am a property owner, and I've been surrounded by development. I am in agriculture. So my question to you would be, if you've met the challenge and provided a tangible offer to the owner of the property that would allow them to enter negotiations.
I have not, and I would be glad to, but the real question is, have we even determined if the current applicant is under a purchase agreement and if they have the resources to complete the purchase? That's the more prudent question. I'd be glad to buy this as agricultural land. I just completed a purchase of 40 acres at Cunamora Road and Pleasant Valley in the last 14 days, the northeast corner. So I have the means and the capabilities to make land purchases. I'm a significant landowner in the valley. And of course, I would love to acquire this land, but not for residential use. It'd be for agriculture. And what would I grow? I would return it either to mint, or I would invest significant money for long-term use for an orchard. I think this would be beautiful for grapes or cherries or even apples, which are prominent in the area. I think it would be beautiful.
Thank you, Mr. Colias.
Madam Chair, I have one more question for the applicant, and it relates. Are you aware that there's a price differential between assessed ag ground and property zoned for residential development? I assume that you understand that there's a price differential, is what I should say.
That was from the applicant. That was not for me, if I remember correct. That question.
Was for Mr. Colias, who's expressed an interest in this property. And I understand that ag ground, just priced at ag ground, is priced differently than property that's zoned not ag ground. So I'm just asking if he understands that there is, because he's a developer, because he's also a farmer, there is a difference between that, and I was looking for an acknowledgement that he has an awareness of that price differential.
If you're asking Steve Colias that question, yes, of course I understand that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this time, Mr. Taylor, you can do yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Commissioners. As my letter states, on July 15th, I represent the contract purchaser of the property, so it is under contract. The people I represent do have the ability to perform that contract.
Okay.
The standards that I've heard Mr. Colias and Mr. Johnson talk about are higher and more detailed than what are in the codes. And requesting standards higher than codes is a little unusual and atypical for an attorney. That surprises me just a little bit. One of the points Mr. Johnson made was that the analysis was incomplete, maybe at the P&Z level, to see if the benefits of what's being proposed outweigh the ag. And I would say that that's a misguidance of the issue. The issue is it orderly growth? Is it the next field that's available for growth? And what does this landowner want to do with his property rights? Because a farmer who's been farming his whole life may not want to keep farming when he turns 50 or 60 or 70. And so the benefits of development outweigh ag. That's one way to look at it. Another is, what does this landowner want to do? And that's consistent with property rights. And we suggest that approval of this application will be upholding property rights.
Thank you.
Second point Mr. Johnson made was we requested that the board deny the application and or remand it so that P&Z can have that discussion that I just considered or outlined about the benefits of residents outweigh ag, and that is unnecessary and out of process. So this process and this application is in full compliance with the county codes. Mr. Colias brought up, suggested that maybe this property should wait until city water and sewer get there so they can develop into higher density. That's inconsistent with the county's comprehensive plan and code, which provide for orderly development. Orderly development of a rural nature is not development of a city nature. And of course, keeping this in a rural nature, keeping development in this area a rural nature is consistent with the comprehensive plan. The last paragraph of the letter that I submitted to you draws a distinction between the rural character of this neighborhood and what I call the mega apartments going up in Meridian and Nampa. There are different housing types and styles for a variety of people. We don't certainly want just one type. Mr. Colias talked a lot about dangerous with well and septic. You know as well as I do, that's the standards of Southwest District Health District apply and will be complied with. There's plenty of water, quantity and quality out here for domestic purposes. I wrote a note here that says the word that Mr. Colias used was prudent. He suggested that it would be prudent for the county to make the current landowner continue farming this property. I know you've never heard that before. It's been talked about by opponents of residential development in this county for at least 20 years, 22 years since I've been here doing this. And I would just remind Mr. Colias, who did say that his property is next in line in the path of growth, that if it's prudent to keep it ag, he's welcome to be prudent for his property. Keep it ag if he would like. But to impose his desire on someone else's property and property rights is overreaching. I have a high degree of confidence in Canyon County's code, which has been through numerous public hearings and revisions over the last 20 years. So once again, this application and this process is in complete compliance with the county's codes and ordinances and standards.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Clark?
Just brief.
Very.
Yeah, I will be very brief. Heath Clark, 251 East Front Street. Just to emphasize a couple of the procedural items and legal standards that have been identified. Again, on the speculation comment, the county doesn't change the outcome of an application based on who the applicant is or who may live there. I can't emphasize that enough, but that's been a major component of the opponent's argument here. We don't control who lives there. We don't control the price point at which it's sold. We don't judge applications based on one person's opinion of that applicant's experience or background. With regard to some of these other standards, Mr. Johnson has repeatedly referred to a standard of whether the agricultural use is viable at the location. That's not a rezone standard. You've seen the rezone standards, they focus on the comprehensive planning. The comprehensive planning for this area is residential. That's the future use. And with that, Commissioner Van Beek, I appreciated your question to Mr. Colias. I think we need to be very careful about having conversations with folks about their willingness to acquire property during the course of an application. But I think that puts his comments in a pretty negative light. You heard him say he'd be glad to purchase it at an agricultural value, not for what it actually is comprehensively planned by the county for. This is not a chance to use the public process to try to work your way in to try to acquire something for someone's own benefit. Again, we have to keep our eyes on the ball. And the ball here is that this is a rezone and it is precisely in conformance with the comprehensive plan. And this applicant has even far more information than would typically be provided at this stage in the process. So appreciate everyone's patience.
Thank you very much. There's no one else signed up to speak.
Madam Chair, I move to close public testimony.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Madam Chair, there's been a lot of good discussion here today, and this was continued in reading the minutes at my request because I do like to be diligent on it. I like to ferret out concerns from both sides. I felt like there was a need to acquire additional information, and in that process, we get to something, hopefully, that even if it's not what they were looking for, we have a legally defensible, well-rounded argument that makes sense. And so we're going to have to land on what we get to do in here's the legislative portion of this, where we're doing the land policy. A lot of these decisions about how the land was to be used predate me as a commissioner. I take these decisions seriously. I read the comprehensive plan. I read the staff reports. I read the information that's submitted. And so in the process, looking at the questions that we've already discussed in the land use policies and goals that are outlined in the first staff report, what we can find is an ability to overcome. And right now in the West, in Canyon County, personal property rights do have to be considered, as Mr. Taylor has pointed out, in what happens to the ground. I appreciate Mr. Clark pointing out the nature of my question is one that every landowner is faced with. It also ties in with a policy in the East, which is not in the West, that farmers could be compensated at full market value for their land and continue that in perpetuity if they choose to participate in that kind of a program. We currently don't have that. We have a talking group, but that does not exist today. So I can't make a decision based on that. So in the findings of facts and the conclusions of law and order, looking at the comprehensive plan, looking at orderly growth, I did not approve that original subdivision. I knew of that developer. He tried to develop in a section of Canyon County that was very close to my heart where I live. I don't own that decision. I just know that it's there. And so in looking at that, it is correct on both sides. This is diversified ag ground. My heart is in ag. I love ag. But I did not get to trump personal property rights. And so, in the strictest sense, Madam Chair, does this application meet the criteria that's been laid out in the comprehensive plan? Has the applicant done the diligence that would allow us to provide an answer of allowing this as a straight rezone? And in my humble opinion, for me, requesting additional information and time to review this, to hear both sides again, as we weigh the scale, the answer is yes. And I do not have a reason to deny the applicant personal property rights because he brought in the level of diligence that he has, and there's attorneys on both sides that heard the arguments, and that's my humble opinion of this application.
Thank you. Looking through the findings of fact and conclusions of law and all of these different things, is the proposed zone change consistent with the comp plan? Yes. Yes. Personal property rights are one of my sticklers because I have always believed that their ground, the farmland, these individuals, yes, they inherited this land. That's why the blood, sweat, and tears was put in it originally, so it would be there for an inheritance, or it would be there for medical bills, or it would be there for retirement, or it would be there for some other emergency. It's everything that they own. Many of the landowners that come before us, they're selling their ag land. It's everything they've ever owned. It is all that they have. And so, yes, it is an inheritance. These two people did inherit that. And that is not a bad thing. I think that's a wonderful thing that it's perpetuated down through life. And it keeps the property viable in our Canyon County, okay? We've got a local individual here that is going to build a home for him and his family, and it's on the record. And we have seen pictures of homes of a contractor that does some very, very good, very thorough work in this county, in all areas of this county and around this valley. I'll just make note that that contractor was at one time, he was I think a 25 or 28 something year individual in the Nampa Fire Department. So this is not a fly-by-night contractor. This is, I feel good about what was presented here. And in looking at all of this, planning and zoning, yes, they did deny this, but they denied it, and it even says in the records, in the minutes and stuff, because they didn't have any conceptual plan. They didn't have an idea of where it was going to go, and therefore, but they found it compatible in all these other areas with the comprehensive plan and moving forward on this. And I see this as, this is an unusual piece of property. It could be a difficult piece of property, but it also can turn something into something very, very beautiful and very important for that area and the nature and the environmental setting that it will be in. So I have had all my questions answered on this, and I am ready to make a decision, so I will.
Madam Chair, may I make one comment? I wanted to piggyback, since we've had a couple of these where there's been a proposal to bring city services in, and as Mr. Taylor touched on that, as one of the criteria for maintaining the character of the area, it is a true statement that a residential, rural residential, has to maintain some space, and it cannot look like a city development. And so to bring city services, number one, you have traffic issues to mitigate that I don't know that you could ever come with that kind of for lots per acre, and it wouldn't make sense to put that, you couldn't pull it, it wouldn't pencil out for this. So I just wanted to make that point clear that that would be inconsistent, that would be a sticking point that would cause not only this board, but planning and zoning to turn that out, in my opinion. So thank you for that. Are you ready for a motion?
Yes.
Okay. With the information that's provided, I move that we approve the zoning amendment and the rezone in case number RZ 2019-0038, and that we sign the findings of fact and conclusions of law and order for the ordinance.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, very good. That, we will get those things signed, and that will conclude this meeting. Thank you very, very much, all of you that are here in person, those of you that webbed in with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to participate in this very important decision.
It looks like Dan Lister.
Dan Lister. Yes.
Oh, sorry. I made a comment real quick that my PowerPoint presentation would be Exhibit 8.
8? Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. That will conclude this meeting.